All right, welcome everyone. December. We have an end of year review today. So just going to be going through all that today. Feel free to chime in if you have questions as we're going. I'm just going to be doing the intro and the presentation today. Feel free to chime in if you have questions as we go through it. So here's today's agenda. We'll just do our normal introduction, overview. We'll do the updates from the Stroud folks. And then, as I mentioned, the presentation is going to be EnviroDIY and the DRB for this year. And then hopefully we'll have some time for discussion. This meeting is being recorded. Please stay muted other than if you're chiming in. Recordings are here, wikiwatershed.org/DRWI. You can also just go to the Wiki Watershed page and go to the DRWI tab. These monthly meetings are every third Thursday of the month, 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon. This Zoom link is always the same, so keep that for your records if you like. I do send out reminders 1 week prior and the day of, although I'm realizing today I forgot to send the morning reminder out. So apologies on that. I hope we didn't miss anyone because of that. Feel free to share this info with others and let me know if you'd like to have others on the distribution list. Reminder on attendees of these meetings, folks working in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, folks working in the Delaware River Basin, but who are not directly associated with the DRWI. And then we've got a few folks from outside the DRB that have been attending. Stroud is able to support this work via the DRWI and via Seesaw. 4 States, 1 Source is the DRWI webpage. Feel free to check that out. It's a William Penn Foundation funded project. Seesaw, Consortium for Scientific Assistance to Watersheds, is a PA DEP Growing Greener grant. So goals for these meetings, just monthly, once a month time for us to check in, talk about issues, address questions. We always have a presentation. We provide updates. Presentations have generally been an equal distribution, relatively equal distribution between Stroud Center presenters and presenters from all the different watershed groups working throughout the Delaware River Basin. And certainly these meetings, Stroud Center support, all of our collaborative efforts are simply to support building capacity, supporting gathering good data and using it purposefully. So here's some personnel. Me, Rachel is often out in the field supporting the stations with technical expertise. Krista Reeves with Musconetcong Watershed Association, Shannon Hicks, the designer of the EnviroDIY stations and the Mayfly data loggers. Carol Armstrong and George Seeds, master watershed stewards, who support the effort. DRWI leads John Jackson, Matt Earhart, and Dave Arscott. Stroud Center. Our primary goal, from Stroud Center perspective, regarding EnviroDIY and the DRB, our primary goal is to continue to support station owners, managers, and volunteers in using the stations for their own local purposes. Secondarily, we are doing basin-wide analyses and developing tools that can help assist people in understanding, interpreting, communicating their data. Just a reminder that there is a comprehensive EnviroDIY manual, EnviroDIY.org/knowledge base. It is a searchable manual with different sections that you can click on. There's a main manual and then appendices. Feel free to reference that as needed. There are also links in there to quick guides. A lot of those quick guides are in this this page again, wikiwatershed.org/DRWI. Again, this is where you enter your data from your field visit data sheets. There are lots of help resources, quick guides, etc. There's recordings of the monthly meetings and other presentations from workshops and conferences and so on. So feel free to review those and make use of those to build your understanding of all of the science going on with these monitoring stations and associated monitoring. So just some updates. Continuing groups are still doing salt snapshots. Stroud Center has been supporting these at various levels, from doing the actual facilitation of them to just consultations and everything in between. So feel free to be in touch if you'd like to try to do that type of work. There is a written up protocol for this. It's a sort of a standard approach that can be adjusted according to your specific intentions and your specific capacities with regard to people and time and such. This fall, we've had some discussions about where to pose questions and discussion as follow-up from these meetings. ManageMyWatershed.org. That is one of the newest Wiki Watershed tools. So, and there is a Q&A section within that. So feel free to use that to pose questions. I think we need to, it's sort of just hasn't gotten much momentum yet. So feel free to start trying to use that. We can see how it goes. So any questions at this point before we move on to the presentation? All good? Okay. I will share again. Okay. So, as I mentioned, the presentation today is the year in review, 2022. Hopefully it will be of some use to folks. So I'm going to go through just the list of the monthly meeting topics that we had through the year. So last January, we looked at Monitor My Watershed updates and EnviroDIY technology upgrades and updates. So this was kind of a comprehensive look at using Monitor My Watershed and updating folks on its capacities, and then talking about some of the technology upgrades and updates. In February, Carol Armstrong did a presentation on her monitoring of Pickering Creek. And we also introduced a number of different surveys on Monitor My Watershed usage. We started the salt and tap water survey, and we also had a survey on looking at terminology for use in the community science realm. In March, we basically just fed back on those results from those surveys. In April, we kind of went deep into the broad scale data analysis. Diana Oviedo Vargas from Stroud did some analysis of the data set, and we also looked at conductivity chloride rating curves from across the Delaware Basin. In May, Krista Reeves did a presentation on her temperature monitoring in the Musconetcong watershed. In June, Ryan Newman and folks from the Pennypack group and the Wissahickon group talked about their efforts in communicating their monitoring data to their local communities and decision makers. In July, Jeff Rogalski and Alex Jackson from the Tobyhanna-Tunkhannock Creek Watershed Association and Broadhead Watershed Association reviewed a potential warehouse development, big warehouse development alongside that is scheduled to occur alongside the Tunkhannock Creek. And their efforts to get a monitoring system plan for monitoring that development if and when it happens. In August, Stroud Center did stats and data summaries of EnviroDIY stations across the basin. We revisited again the salt and tap water results. We reviewed some of the Monitor My Watershed features for station tracking for station owners. We reviewed data on station visits and quality control. And then in September, we reviewed specifically and in depth that salt snapshot protocol that I pointed out earlier, talking about how it's done and its purpose, types of data that you get and how to use those data. And then in the fall, just this fall, in October, we looked at winter salt data, including cations, and there's the importance of those, usefulness of those in understanding salt pollution. And then we also got feedback from you all on just these meetings and format and content. And then just this past month in November, the Willistown Conservation Trust and Darby Creek Valley Association talked about their headwaters monitoring project and a recent salt snapshot they did in that watershed. And that brings us to December for a year in review. So moving on, some technology for the year, general updates. So Mayfly data loggers were upgraded from the version 0.5B to version 1.0 and higher, and the current version 1.1 is what's being used out there. There were 43 stations across the basin that received new Mayfly data loggers. And then there was also a new EnviroDIY LTE-B cell board that Shannon designed, put out to replace some of those older cell boards that didn't work as well and that were starting to fail. Also 43 of those put out. And this link here on the EnviroDIY page under Mayfly and hardware, you can look at specifics of some of those changes that have gone on with the data loggers for some of those folks who are a little more interested in the technology. Okay. So moving on to some data. So what I wanted to do here was talk about just some basics of how the continuous data from your stations can be used in just understanding water quality in the streams that are being monitored with those stations. So here's a graph of continuous data from a stream in New Jersey. I believe it's the Paulins Kill. And this is summertime temperature data. You have the temperatures here. We're down here at 16 as an ideal temperature for trout. We're referencing trout criterion thresholds. We've got 20, 22, and 25 are these New Jersey DEP limits that they use in managing trout streams. Okay, so with all this data, you're thinking about calibrating yourself to what the data actually mean. And so that means thinking about government regulatory criteria, as well as ecological thresholds. Sometimes ecological thresholds don't actually match up with formal regulatory criteria, unfortunately. I think salt is a current one where certainly there are effects, and we'll get into this, but certainly there are effects of salt below the EPA recommended threshold of 230 milligrams. But here you can see with temperature that there's a long period of time in which the temperatures in this stream are above ideal temperatures for trout. So that's giving you some idea of stress and to potential trout there, and giving you some ideas to the ability of that stream to to harbor trout, to live and to reproduce. So also using the idea of comparing to other sites. So, you have one site, well, how does my site compare to others? And often how this comparison is done is by looking at the surrounding landscape. Is the watershed wooded? Is it agriculture? Is it urban? What's the level of imperviousness? All these types of things can help explain and inform why your data look the way they look. So what we have here is continuous data, temperature data from a developed watershed, in which there's presumably less riparian protection, less shading, so on and so forth. And you're comparing here to streams in a forested watershed where your temperatures are clearly much lower. Obviously, these trends are not always going to be the same. There's lots of other variables that are there that you have to consider. A big, large river that is heavily forested may be warmer than a urban headwater stream. So you need to consider other factors, but certainly comparing to other systems is a good way to understand the data that you're looking at. So calibrating your sort of understanding of your data by looking at how your data relates to other streams, other watersheds, and looking at what those variations are between those watersheds as explanatory factors in what your data look like. So here's conductivity in comparison to, again, a New Jersey stream in comparison to the chronic fluoride level. This level is imposed. This is about where 230 milligrams per liter chloride would be. It's set on this conductivity threshold, on this conductivity axis. But again, you're comparing the continuous data to a regulatory threshold. And what the continuous data allow you to do is just, see on a day by day, hour by hour, 5 minute by 5 minute basis, how the data relate to these criterion thresholds that have ecological significance. Usually those types of things are relating to biological impacts. And indeed, the 230 milligrams per liter chloride is the EPA recommended threshold at which there is impact to biology. Again, we're looking at the concept here of comparing to other streams, other types of watersheds to get perspective on your own data. So we see here, this is conductivity data in a developed, urbanized watershed, urbanizing watershed, higher imperviousness, more salting, potentially wastewater treatment, and other sources that increase conductivity. And this is very typical, where higher conductivity, you can see there's ups and downs, but all along, this is conductivity that is substantially higher than natural levels. And you can see all of these streams here are in heavily forested watersheds, resting well below this higher conductivity seen in this urban watershed. So moving on to broad trends. This is just a 1-to-1 scatter plot showing average base flow chloride in milligrams per liter. So base flow, just as a reminder for everyone, is sort of just the resting state of a stream whenever it's not being influenced by runoff. Okay, so that's average chloride during those conditions. So that's the chloride level that is for the majority of the time is in a stream. that organisms in a stream are being exposed to, for instance. And that is plotted against percent impervious cover. Okay, so that's all. Impervious cover is all of those surfaces that are not, that don't allow rain to infiltrate. So in addition to roofs of houses and buildings, it is roads and parking lots, sidewalks, so on. All of the surfaces that get salted in the winter and that are also associated with human activity and greater human populations. The right axis here is impervious cover, so this is just a duplicate of this x-axis. So we see an increasing trend, as is expected, with impervious surface. So as impervious surface goes up, so does chloride, and so does conductivity. What I'm pointing out here is that at about 10% imperviousness, you have about 40 to 50 milligrams per liter chloride. Both of those numbers are numbers that research has shown in peer-reviewed publications that those levels have impacts on aquatic life. So 40 to 50 milligrams chloride has been shown to have impact on aquatic life, such as zooplankton and mussels. And 10% imperviousness and even less. There's been some studies that have shown even just in single digits imperviousness will have impacts on aquatic life. So a thing to keep in mind with all of this stuff that we're talking about, you have these set thresholds, these set criteria, but it's always a gradient. So it's not like if you get past 230 milligrams per liter chloride that suddenly all the bugs are going to die off. It's a gradient. So that's just something to keep in mind. So here is that 230 level. This is a bar chart of sites, EnviroDIY continuous data sites across the Delaware River Basin. Again, it's average base flow chloride. So this is just the normal resting state chloride found in streams, not thinking about, winter salt spikes or flushes or anything like that. This is just average levels throughout the year. So that includes spring, that includes summer, that includes fall. It's not just winter. And what we see here is that at the 230 level, there's maybe, what is that? About an eighth of the streams that are shown here are exceeding that 230 level. And then we've got, and one other thing to point out here, this color gradient is, again, impervious cover. So you can see we go from blue to green to yellow and orange and red. Ideally, this would actually be shifted down and we'd be getting into yellow right here at 10%. But as we have it right now, we can't adjust this gradient, because this 10% level is really the point that I think we should be really kind of red flagging for potential problems, and even less than that, really. So anyway, 120 milligrams per liter is the Canada regulatory level, chronic chloride level. And you can see about a quarter of the sites are exceeding that. And then we've got 50 milligrams per liter, which is not a regulatory threshold. It is a recommended hazard threshold that has been put out there by Ohio and Maryland. And also there's a number of papers that are showing even less than 50 in the 30 to 40 range chloride having significant impact on biological communities. So again, the concept of the gradient here is that, when you start adding salt, you get to a certain point and it is going to start impacting certain organisms, which is going to impact other organisms via cascading effects. And then as you go up, there's going to just be more and more organisms that are directly affected by the salt. So maybe I should pause here. Any questions from anyone at this point? All good, we're at 3 o'clock. No questions at this point? Keep going. All good from you, Krista? Thumbs up, awesome. Okay, back to share. Okay. Oops, I forgot to put a header on this. Same thing. This is our looking at our broad data. 300, for those who are just looking for one number to go by in terms of risk, 300 microsiemens per centimeter is, for conductivity, is kind of a commonly used, very general chronic threshold to be aware of. Certainly, as we know, with conductivity, you have to be cautious because there are streams that have naturally high conductivity. Some of these streams that lie in limestone valleys and have different types of carbonate and limestone and such, geology will have elevated conductivity due to that influence, which is obviously a natural influence. Oftentimes those streams are in lower elevations and have been developed, so they may have naturally high conductivities and then salt on top of that. A good example of that is Valley Creek in southeastern PA in Chester County, where there's a heavy limestone influence, but there's also heavy salt contamination. Again, we're looking.
Hey, Dave.
Yes.
It's Diane McGovern.
Hi, Diane.
I got a question. A typical town, let's like Kennett Square, what percent impervious surface would it have?
Well,
have any sense?
You mean just like the town limits?
Yeah, and how would that compare
high.
to like out where Stroud is in terms of impervious surfaces?
So the impervious surfaces, a downtown area like Kennett is going to be super high. So if you just were talking about that, if you were just delineating the actual town, it would be very high, because if you can imagine the downtown there's not much grass, there's not much, it's sidewalks, it's roads, and it's buildings, which is all impervious surface. Now, when we're talking about these patterns, it's about within a bigger watershed, and that, or watersheds, that Kennett Square area, it is part of a watershed. So, it is contributing to the overall percent imperviousness of, a watershed or watersheds, depending on exactly how it drains.
So just let me follow up a little bit on that. So sure. Let's say we know it's like really bad, like in an urban area like that. So it's also going to be like, I guess, bad right immediately downstream, and then the effect would get less and less as you go further downstream.
Yeah, I think in that type of case that you're describing, there may be a dilution factor where there's some, stuff coming in, unwanted, unideal stuff, that stressor type stuff that's coming in from that impervious area, from that urban area. But then as you go downstream, the stream is going to be fed by presumably less contaminated groundwater, speaking very generally, which is going to help to kind of, dilute some of those, in this case, salt contaminants from that upstream area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. So it's almost like you'd have to control the urban areas more than the suburban areas.
Well, suburban areas can certainly have an influence too, and there's quite a bit of impervious surface that goes along with suburban areas. Parking lots, for instance, are huge, surface, a lot of surface area associated with parking lots, and oftentimes there's, plowing as well as salt spreading across all of those. as well to go along with all of the actual activity, that happens on those in terms of cars and all of the waste that comes off of cars. And it really is oftentimes imperviousness, Diane, is simply calculated off of land use. So it's sort of just, there's certain coefficients that are associated with different land uses, and it's just sort of an adjustment of land use to come up with an impervious cover number.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Good questions. Appreciate those.
David, Grace here.
Hey, Grace.
Hi. Following up on that, are there any particular studies that have real calculations or a 90% coverage, impervious coverage, let's say a huge parking lot in a store?
Mm-hmm.
And that, are there studies that say on these impervious surfaces, you have the following percentages of salt, let's say studies in suburban areas or even urban areas, so that you get to have concrete takeaway of the salt that are contributed by these sites?
Yeah, I think that's probably very situational because, certainly there's going to be more salt applied depending on just what the weather is like. There's some studies or a study that has been getting cited seemingly a lot lately that, kind of parsed out different sources of salt within different watersheds, and it sort of brought to light some watersheds, up to 50% of the salt coming into a watershed was coming from parking lots. So people think about like roads and sidewalks with salt a lot, but when you think about the just the surface area, if it's a commercial area or with these big warehouses or whatever, where there's just a lot of surface area associated with parking lots, that seemingly can have a big influence on the salt contamination that happens in a watershed.
I put that Phil Sexton paper in the chat if anybody
Excellent.
wants to read that. That's the one that David's referencing.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Anything else before we move on? Okay. So I was hoping to adjust. This is maximum chloride. So this represents some of these salt flushes, these salt spikes that happen in the wintertime. It's probably going to be a little hard to see here, but this is 120,000. Is that right? And I'm sorry, this is actually, I think this is actually conductivity. Regardless, point being, the acute limits, I couldn't even really plot them here because they're so low. Some of these, I think it's about, 1 out of 1/8 of the sites or something like that in the DRB. These ones that are associated with urban areas are getting these spikes that are super high, and they often are exceeding these acute type limits. So in terms of the continuous data, that is a particular piece of information that is very hard to get unless you have continuous sensors out there. You can get an idea about base flow salt contamination with conductivity and chloride measurements during, throughout the year. You just go out whenever you're sure that the stream is stable and isn't being influenced by runoff and just do some measurements. But these salt spikes, you can try to time it and go out when you think the salt is being flushed into the stream, but you really don't have any exact way to determine what those peaks are. So unless you're sitting there and actually by hand collecting data points every whatever 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes over several hours during when these salt spikes might be happening, you're not going to be able to figure out that information. And that's one area in which these continuous sensors have really shown some of these just ridiculous spikes that we're seeing, or tens of thousands of units and multiple sites over seawater of about 50,000 microsieverns per centimeter.
Dave, I have a question from chat. Somebody wanted to know, in Pennsylvania, what's the best mapping tool for impervious cover? I know what it is in New Jersey, but not so much with PA. So.
Impervious cover?
Yeah.
Boy, I'd have to, I mean, Model My Watershed will give you a good display of up to 2019 land cover data. You can certainly by hand go and adjust those land use numbers with imperviousness.
Right, where it says developed low intensity, developed medium intensity, things like that, and turn those into impervious cover numbers.
Exactly.
Okay.
But you know, that would probably be something that would be good to put on the Manage My Water, ask as a question on Manage My Watershed, and see what feedback we get from folks.
And if you're in New Jersey, NJ GeoWeb is pretty good about that. If you want to do some impervious cover calculations for your watershed, and NJ Map is also a good resource for impervious cover.
That's great, Krista. Why don't you put those in?
Mm-hmm. Will do.
I'm realizing, what time is it now? It's 3. Oh boy, I better get moving here. Sorry, I've been kind of dilly-dallying a bit. All right, average base flow water temperature. Again, this is stations across the DRB. You can see that at the ideal trout temperature of 16 degrees, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, there's not a whole lot of streams that are at that or below. There's quite a few that are in this range that can sustain trout, where they may get stressed in the summer, but they may be able to sustain. A lot of these streams don't have trout. So even though temperatures seem to be okay in some of these, there's going to be other factors that make them not as supportive of trout. And then we're getting up here into the super warm area. Not a whole lot of streams are getting super warm, so that's good to see. So that was a look at some of the broad data. I have some reminders here about just upkeep, and maybe I should have organized this a little differently, but we'll just go through these reminders, and towards the end of this, I'll get back into some kind of reminders about data that relate to the data we just went through. So just a reminder, if your station goes offline, first thing to do is just go out and cycle the power, just like your computer on your desk. Just turn it off, pause for a little bit, turn it back on, and that sometimes will just fix the problem. If your station is offline and you're concerned about missing data, if it goes offline for a significant period of time, swap the micro SD card and see what the data look like on the card. That will help you understand what the actual problem is. If it's online but still getting data to the SD card, then it's a transmission problem. If there's not data on the card as well, then it's going to be another problem more local to the station. Reminder to station owners to check your hologram balances. Do this at least once a year, so that you don't want these to run out, okay? It's a little more of a production if you let it run out. So you just want to schedule it, mark your calendars to just check your hologram accounts and load money into those as needed. Just a note that sometimes hologram emails go to spam, so you may not get the reminder if they do send you one. Sensor cleaning, you know, we recommend doing it weekly to start, and then, you know, you can back off of that if it doesn't seem necessary. The way you determine that is just look at the data before and after cleaning. If the data doesn't change after you've cleaned, then it probably didn't need to be cleaned. If the data changes a lot after you've cleaned, then maybe you need to clean more frequently. Quality control. We recommend in general doing cross checks of the data every 3 months. But if your data look wacky, you can certainly always go out with a hand meter and cross check. This is just proper practice for having duplicate measurements to make sure that the data you're getting are accurate. Conductivity and water temperature, you just cross check with a calibrated handheld meter. You get conductivity and temperature. You can swap SD cards quarterly, especially if you're not getting good transmission to the website. And then I'm going to talk about depth in the next slide. This is this is the generation 1 CTD sensor. This is the generation 2 sensor. The generation 1, to check depth, you're just going to measure from this slot, the top of this slot where the pressure transducer is, measure from there to the surface of the water. And that should match up relatively closely with the depth that the sensor is reading. You know, we're talking about a 10% more or less error range here that's acceptable. The new sensors do not have that window. So the idea here is to measure from the top and then add that to approximately 70 millimeters to where the approximate location of where the pressure transducer is in that new CTD sensor that does not have a window. Okay, so reminder about doing additional monitoring in association with your continuous sensors, or even independent of your continuous sensors. Synoptic sampling, otherwise known as these snapshots or blitzes, as a lot of folks are referring to them as, snapshots and blitzes, are synoptic sampling, and it just means you're going out in a short period of time and getting a lot of samples so that you're kind of reducing variability. And the idea here, the standard idea is if you have a station, you can go upstream. You can certainly go downstream as well, but the idea here is to go upstream and monitor different nodes, different tributaries, upstream and downstream of different potential sources of contamination, so as to get a better idea as to why your data look like they do at your station. If you don't have a station, just to get a picture of your watershed. Regardless, these synoptic samplings are simply giving you more of a detailed picture of all of the streams within your watershed. And why it's one of the reasons why it's useful in these situations to have a continuous station is that you can be sure that you're doing this synoptic sampling at the right time. So for instance, here with conductivity, you wouldn't want to be going out and doing your synoptic sampling in here when the stream is diluted, because you're not going to get an accurate picture of what conditions are in these streams the majority of the time. So you want to go out, you can use your continuous data to give you confidence that you're going out and sampling at the right time once this conductivity levels off at base flow conditions. So this is the range that you're going to want to go out and do these type of synoptic sampling events. So this is an actual physical map that was marked, a big physical laminated map that was marked up in association with this Valley Creek snapshot that they did recently. And what they did is what we did was wrote, so we have chloride and conductivity for all these sites, and we just wrote them on this map. You're measuring conductivity, you're measuring chloride. And so what it's doing is giving you a picture of all of these different tributaries that are in relation to different land uses and such. And you see quite a bit of variation. You see some of the main stem areas in the hundreds for chloride, and then you have some tributary areas and other areas upwards of 300 milligrams per liter. And you can see that there's two continuous stations here. So those can be used again to sort of just help you figure out and be confident that you're sampling at the right time. Again, another usage of the continuous data in terms of supporting additional sampling is to go out, as I mentioned earlier, and use that continuous data to perfectly time your samples during something such as a road salt flush event, when these spikes happen. So you can go out during all these different spots along this spike and get your samples, get your chloride measurements, as well as any other measurements or samples you want to do, potentially other salt ions. And then what that can allow you to do, what the synoptic sampling and the targeted salt flush sampling can allow you to do, is develop these rating curves in which you're relating chloride to conductivity. And what this allows you to do is understand that relationship and then really just use your conductivity to just tell you about salt. You're going to know, once you have these developed, you're going to know how that conductivity data translates to chloride. Okay. So moving on, just another reminder that
Could I just make a?
Yes,
I'm
of
sorry.
course, Carol.
Sorry, I just wanted to share an idea. So when I did synoptic sampling on the Pickering monthly over 3.5 years, of course, it wasn't 45 locations. It was, I think, 5 or more locations. The other thing that gives you, so you can simplify the process, but it shows you how it's changing over time. Of course, it shows you how it's changing over season as well. But I just wanted to throw that out there as a way of collecting data to show the changes going on in your stream.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Carol. And that really kind of touches on one thing I was going to talk about at the end here, which is just, getting the data is one thing, but just going out and getting it yourself and going to all of these different spots in the watershed and seeing things firsthand, it's about starting to really understand how it all connects. Which certainly is interesting and helps you understand the conditions and your watershed, but it also, there's a certain level of sort of just affection for a watershed, which is something that George Seeds brought up recently. And I think it's something that is worth talking about, just getting in touch with the watershed, with the land, even more broadly speaking, getting in touch with the landscape. And becoming an authority yourself for the watershed. And that sort of relates to these data communication products, in which you're trying to understand the watershed, you're trying to use data as well as firsthand experience and management strategies to communicate to the public, to communicate to decision makers, in a way that is going to be influential and at least is going to make people aware of things, if not encourage change across the landscape. So George and I were talking about this recently. He brought up this book by Wendell Berry, It All Turns on Affection. And I'll just leave this here. Can just read. I don't know if I should read. I guess I can read it. We have the world to live in on the condition that we will take good care of it. And to take good care of it, we have to know it. And to know it and to be willing to take care of it, we have to love it. So the technical stuff is necessary, but it's not everything. The idea is to use the technology and the data to know the landscape for yourself, and use the data to help clarify observations and suspicions and things that a lot of people already know, but you quantify it, and then you have that information to back up what you already know. And that being certainly just really using data, learning your firsthand experience, using your firsthand experience to just learn about how it all connects, and continue to just understand all of those connections that are happening in your landscape in these complex systems. And as George says, that's how you start to care about things. You see the connections and you see how everything influences everything. Okay, so that concludes the presentation. As usual, there are mentors available. The Stroud Center certainly is available to assist at many different levels. There's a lot of folks also in this collaborative effort who have expertise, and there's lots of collaborations possible. So I encourage folks to be in touch with us at the Stroud Center, be in touch with each other. Definitely, you know, feel free to use Manage My Watershed to bring up questions. I would definitely appreciate that. It's sort of one of these tools that we haven't really invested a lot in at this point, but there is a Q&A section, and I think it's a platform that we could be using to kind of follow up on these meetings. So next month's meeting, the new year, Thursday, January 19th. Contact info here at 3:28. I will stop share. And we can chat if anyone has additional questions or anything. Thoughts, questions, concerns?
David, I'm just putting this out. We're planning a public presentation on chlorides and conductivity in our area. We may not have had our water testing fully done or enough stats. We're going out to have 15 different locations approximately. Bert Thielander is
Right.
working. So he's the one who's going to be doing that. But at the end of all of this collection of all the various groups, the sharing of it on the municipal level, the communicating part that you keep talking about, is very relevant. And our group in New York, NY EnviroCom and Deer Park Rural Alliance are very committed to doing short presentations to the town to give them a sense of what we're doing and why it's important, you know.
Yeah.
But I'd like to know what other groups are doing or have the idea to do to share to the decision makers in their community. That's one of the reasons I'm obsessed with asphalt and coverage and all these huge parking lots. We have several abandoned malls or semi-abandoned around, so that the sense of the impact of all of these things in are with assaults particularly, that the big ticket items, the arresting items, waking up the municipal boards, your planning board and our boards. Are other people thinking in that way of really doing presentations? Because we could coordinate. We have a couple of very, very savvy computer people, but we really don't have scientists. We don't have, we can do the explanations. We wouldn't get too far in the weeds with them, but to give them a heads up to what to think about. The other day, one of the town supervisors says, "Oh, the shed is chock full. It's full to the brim with salt." You know, like, and I thought, oh, you know, of course we want safe roads, but what are other people thinking or doing in this area?
So, for the sake of time, Grace, I can mention a few that are doing exactly what you're talking about, which is developing presentations to go along with their data, to explain their data, to explain their concerns, to explain issues. Valley Forge Trout Unlimited is currently doing that. Angelica Creek Watershed Association is currently doing that.
When you, excuse me, when you say doing that, they're sharing to, not just within their group. but
Correct.
They're sharing it to elected or appointed town officials.
Correct. They are developing presentations for that purpose, or are already started doing that.
David,
Yes, go ahead, David.
can I suggest this as a topic for one of our future meetings? Because I'm super interested in this interface with municipalities.
Yeah, and I sort of wonder if it would be even you know, a workshop that we should work on. And I kind of wonder if we could even just pull together you know, like a committee or something to sort of get a workshop together on that on that basic topic. So I don't know, David, Grace, we could certainly just plan for that in the new year.
Yes, I think that would be very helpful.
David?
Yeah, I as well, and maybe some brainstorming.
Okay. Because I think really talking about that at the level of detail that is probably necessary is probably beyond a, you know, half-hour conversation in this meeting. Ian
Most
says that would be
definitely.
helpful for them too. Okay.
And the extent of knowing the audience and developing almost possibly a template for approaching towns to it's very important, and not coming as the outsider, but we're all within the towns, and this is the deal, nothing, you know.
Yep.
So it's accepted.
Yep. All right, well, why don't we have the conversation? You know, maybe just those you folks, there may be a few others. David, Grace, Ian, if you guys want to sort of just follow up with me, let's just talk in the new year, and we'll figure out who wants to sort of help facilitate this type of event. And maybe we can put a workshop together, maybe a, you know, half day or something workshop, maybe not that long, at least 2 hours, I would think, to kind of
Agreed.
do this. But I think that the thing there is that I think we really need to, we're going to need to do the research and really get to the heart of the matter. I think Alex Jackson is from Broadhead is someone that would be good to have on that. Bullard, maybe. There's plenty of folks I think that are in that realm. Pete Goodman, who would be able to provide. Krista, of course. Carol. So there's plenty of people that I think have experience in this, more experience than I do in this, and we can. I think we can pull a good event together that will help to support this, because it's definitely been a pretty prominent topic recently. And I see one more chat that came up.
Hey, Dave, I'll jump in here for a second.
Go ahead, Mike.
So yeah, there's plenty of interaction between us out there and the townships, the EACs, and there's multi-municipal EACs, and there's the Watersheds reboot at the county and stuff. I think what would be useful would a very clear set of, well, here's what specifically we're concerned about. It could be something as specific as, we would like to see state-of-the-art best practices in terms of controlling salt application, like a concept take all this data that's being generated, stick it in behind it, and keep it really simple, so that these people that are making the decisions have a something to look at and understand, and then they can explain what they want to do to the people around them. That's the most. It's like they have the ability to support their explain to the public why they're making choices or recommending stuff.
Good. That's great, Mike.
We're in a situation that I think is more remedial, and that we would have to present with, before we put forth best practices, even get them to that, we have to massage. And that, I don't know if other towns are in that situation, other groups who want to do this, but that's a very critical thing to get people to lean in and really listen, and not sit back and fold their arms like, yeah. So I think, although we could develop a template, I think you move elements in and out depending upon the group, the audience that you have to appeal to. It always has to be appeal specific.
That's great, Grace. Okay. Well, folks are dropping off. Anything else on anyone's mind to go over before we close out here for the year? No. Okay. Well, thanks everyone, and feel free to be in touch, and have a happy holidays and a happy new year.
Same to you. Same to
Thank
everyone.
you, Dave.